1 week season.
OWS fam, the nation, my dudes and dudettes. We are back for Searching for Ceiling, presented by 1 week season and Sharp Football Analysis. This edition, the Week 11 edition. And we are greeted by the triumphant return. We're just going to get right into it, man. Triumphant return of Mr. Rich Hribar. Dude, we missed you last week, man.
I missed you guys, man, but we were joking a little bit with the show. I think it was divine intervention. I do a show at Davis Maddock where we pick games against the spread and just kind of BS before this, and I was on and just like literally right across the street, this like huge transformer blew and like just just turned off, and I didn't get power back for a couple hours. They were working on it. You have a tight schedule, so you're like, I'm gonna I'm gonna tag someone in, phone a friend, and get it going. But I sucked last week. I had a terrible week. I actually didn't end up loving this slate. My Sunday chat, I told him I was like, I'm scaling back like my play this week. I don't feel confident. And so I said, I think it was great for me not to be on the show and give gamers a bunch of terrible advice. We got it out of the way when I wasn't on.
That's all right. I was dishing out Baker Mayfield doubles. So that's how the week went for me. Actually, I was on my primary for my single entry was Drake May, Ramondre Stevenson, Hunter Henry. So that didn't pan out.
But yeah. Dude, it's funny. It's ironic. Oh my God, we would have walked down to the path of death like Thelma and Louise, holding hands in the car, because I tried to create some cheap stacks around that Bears game for sure.
Yeah.
And
it was real good. Yeah. So I want to talk real quick. We got a lot of outrage, oh my God, scoring was so bad. The NFL is ruined. What is going on? We've seen this trend the entirety of the season.
3 years.
We've seen this. Yeah, yes. Going back to 2020, going back to the COVID year. This is the 4th year of down scoring. So it should not surprise us that at some point it's gonna spearhead. It's gonna come to a point, an apex.
And last week, I think there was just an interjection too of it not being a slate I felt good about and confident about, and the pricing was tighter. This week we've got a lot of fun games that are engaging, and pricing's a little looser. It's just a lot to feel better about this week.
Interesting that you bring up pricing is a little looser. I noticed that as well, looking through the slate. And it's just through this idea that there are players on the slate that are fundamentally underpriced. Talk to me a little bit about some of those players that you see before we continue.
Yeah, there's a couple, I think, coming out of buys and, depending on both sites you play on. But I mean, a couple of guys that definitely show up to me. Cedric Tillman, definitely underpriced, still coming out of the buy. Cortland Sutton, where he's priced, makes no sense still, where his usage rates are and the production he's had. We can talk about these in these spots, but I'm just reeling off some names here that I know are definitely underpriced for me. One that I don't know if we'll talk about because it's a Searching for Ceiling show. DK Metcalf on DraftKings is definitely
the forgotten man.
It looks pretty overlooked too this week, but definitely guys like Tillman and Cortland Sutton stand out as they should be aware. And I guess you can include Juwan Jennings. We'll see what's going on with his injury, his midweek injury, but he's definitely underpriced, I think, for what his production has been as well.
Yeah, 11 targets last week, man. Did not find the bonus or put the slate out of reach, but very few players did. And we were talking 3-4 players, skill position players, put up 25 plus fantasy points. One of them was Marquez Valdes-Scantling on a 48% snap rate. Anyway, very, very weird week. When we turn the page, I'll add some names to that too. Christian McCaffrey is probably fundamentally underpriced relative to what we saw last week. He immediately re-entered 88% of the snaps, all but 2 running back opportunities, all but 6 running back snaps. So he is back, baby. CMC is back. Now they get the divisional opponent in the Seattle Seahawks that they've kind of had their number in the past. Devon Achane has production through the air only that equates to about the wide receiver 10. And you add 10 to 12 weekly carries and he plays running back. He's probably fundamentally underpriced at 7,200. Puka Nacua,
especially if what happened Monday sticky. They gave him, he had 70% of the backfield touches, his highest in a game where Mostert was active. Mostert only played 8 snaps.
We were like, where is this dude?
So if it's a spot now where the Dolphins kind of see this as a situation where they have to basically win a lot of these games, and they just figure that their best path to winning games is to run this offense now through Devon Achane, that's great because we have not seen a lot of samples of that over the past few years, but we know how efficient he is per touch. And if you're going to give a guy like Devin Achane 70% plus of the backfield work, that is a dude you have to play.
Yeah, 100%. And we're basically we're effectively getting, if we add in the running as well, the running usage, we're effectively getting production that equates to about the wide receiver 5 at running back.
That
With
game's
Devon
interesting
Achane.
overall. I don't know if you want to kind of start there because,
Sure.
obviously the Dolphins. So the Dolphins overall have been a team that has been, by and large disappointing this season, no
Mhm.
matter how you really slice it. Outside of Devin Achane, this is a team that's basically underperformed, but they're still like efficient on offense when Tua is played. And we've got them at home, a 26-point team total, 7-point home favorites against the defense we've literally targeted the entire season. I mean, the
Yeah.
last time we saw the Raiders even on the football field, they allowed 5 touchdowns to Joe Burrow. And really the only guy for the Dolphins that the field is showing any interest in right now is Devin Achane. And the team that they're facing, the Raiders, are a type of team that we would love to kind of stack against because they have a very condensed target tree with
Mhm.
Brock Bowers and Jacoby Myers. And really the only player in this game that's drawing any kind of traction is Devin Achane. And this, to me, is a spot that, yeah, the Dolphins have let us down, but objectively, this is like an environment you would stack.
I agree with that. Is it there's a very weird dynamic here because we didn't know the extent of Tyreek Hill's wrist injury really until last week when reports started coming out that like, hey, he's been playing through a torn ligament that was likely suffered when he was arrested prior to week 1. So is this a case where the down production? I mean, Tyreek Hill has 2 touchdowns on the season. Is it a case where that wrist injury is bothering him enough to where we can't go there, or are you looking to take some high upside shots as well?
No, I mean, I still think we can. I mean, he still, has been targeted on 24% of Tua's throws. There's still, we know, his upside per touch. I think if you don't want to play the game of just trying to get one of the Dolphins receivers right at cost, because there are other wide receivers at cost this week that maybe are more intoxicating or you feel safer about. I mean, what about just playing Tua with Achane and then just kind
Yeah.
of doing that where you can, if he throws a touchdown to Tyreek or if he throws a touchdown to Waddle, you still absorb some of that. And then you get because Achane's so active in the passing game too. What about playing it, something like Tua plus Achane plus your flavor of Bowers and Myers?
The problem for me with Tua is
The
he
rushing.
has yeah, he's a pocket passer that doesn't have rushing, but with Tua and with Mike McDaniel's like heavy inside the 10 rush rates, he's had a very, very low frequency hitting to 4x salary
Mhm.
multiplier his week 11 salary. So if you're going to Tua, I think it almost has to be doubles. I would say it almost has to be, and Devon Achane can be included in that, but I would run like a Tua Tyreek with Achane, bring it back with a Jacoby Myers, who he is the primary pass catcher in that offense. You can run it through Brock Bowers if you want, but I would go game environment type bet because that's really what you need, I think, with Tua is like if you're playing him, you're saying this game environment is putting the slate out of reach, and I'm looking to capture all of the upside by doing so. So that's kind of my read on Tua. What about Myers versus Brock Bowers? Do you have any leans there?
Yeah, I still kind of lean Myers just based on where he fits in terms of potential leverage and pricing versus some of the receivers we talked about.
Yeah.
Where Bowers, obviously, if you're playing Bowers and you're trying to play Bowers with, like you said, Tyreek Hill, Devin Achane, like you're in a very pricey stack already. Where
Yeah.
Myers kind of alleviates some of that, and while also double dipping as a potential leverage, counter to Tillman, to Sutton, to if Jennings is played, those types of things.
Yeah, and so it's Friday. I typically dig into like the game theory stuff Friday evening. But the slate feels very much like you have the ability to kind of get back to the standard, like over the last 5 years, like DFS habits, like one pay up running back, one pay up wide receiver, a mid range wide receiver, one pay down wide receiver. So we should expect the wide receivers that are priced around Jacoby Myers to get some interest.
Mhm.
All the names that you just mentioned. So within that, Jacoby Myers is interesting to me to play with one of those guys, as opposed to instead of one of those guys, because now the general roster construction, your salary allocation is very similar to what I expect the field to kind of be like what I call the chalk build, if you're an OWS person. So he's very interesting to me to play like with Cedric Tillman, and kind of deviate a little bit from where we expect the field to be going as far as salary allocation.
I like that.
Anything to add on that?
No, yeah. This was just a one where I kind of like am looking at kind of where the field is looking to go, towards the end of the week, and it's just like really outside of Achane, no one's really drawing any type of interest in this game.
What about here? The question here. I'll let you go, and then I'll give my response. Do we like Jonnu?
I would if we did see. So the Jonnu stuff's a little tricky because we have this sample with Tua that's still kind of smallish in course of the season, and it's impacted by 2 games against the Buffalo Bills where they funnel targets to running backs and tight ends inherently. They play a lot of too high coverage, and we've seen Jonnu play the most snaps he played kind of in those 2 environments. And then we saw last week when they faced the Rams, his route rate kind of dropped. After being over 70% 3 games in a row, went down to 60% on Monday night. So that just makes him a little bit trickier to play. You need kind of the big play from him. From a matchup perspective, it's fine though. Like you're not scared of the Raiders versus tight ends. We've seen them get smoked by a number of dudes. And most recently, Mike Gesicki when we've seen them. The interesting spot of this too is the Raiders, like for being as bad as they are, actually kind of punch back in some of these games. Score 20 points themselves. They've done it a few times, which is why, like I said, this spot kind of looks kind of interesting.
Yeah, and I think that's what you need for Tua and company outside of Achane is probably the only one-off, maybe Jacoby Myers from this game that I'm looking at. You kind of need the Raiders to be punching back a little bit if we're going to Tua. I think if we're going to Tyreek Hill as well, to kind of.
I do know one thing that there's no way we're going to end the season with Jalen Waddle having a 14% target share.
I don't know, man. I don't know.
There's no way.
It's been very interesting. Like I've been waiting for a team that plays heavy quarters to just play Jalen Waddle, because like he's had such drastic splits. Like if they're playing a team against man coverage, it's just like Tyreek Hill and the running backs. If they're playing a team that plays a lot of cover 3 or single high, it's just Tyreek Hill and the running backs. Like I've been waiting for a team that plays a lot of too high / a lot of quarters because that's really where Jalen Waddle kind of comes on, where his splits are mostly in his favor. We just haven't gotten that yet this year. Like we need him to play the Cardinals or some of these teams that are playing a heavy too high cover 4 quarters type.
Yeah, we had it and they didn't throw it.
And he didn't. Yeah, exactly. Right. Yeah. That's my read on that situation.
But I think that ties into some of the Jonnu stuff, though, too. Like Jonnu has had some target elevation that in a sample size of opponents, because Tua missed 5 weeks or 4 weeks of season, is still impacted by some of the opponents that they played. I don't know how sticky it is basically what I'm saying. But I'm not terrified of it. Do you like him?
Not this week, to be honest. This has the feel of heavier snap rate for Julian Hill, for Durham Smythe getting involved. I mean, if you look at how this team is utilizing their tight ends, they're running a ton of 12 personnel. Julian Hill and Durham Smythe are better blockers. Jonnu Smith is like a mega big slot wide receiver wrapped up in a tight end bow. But I would expect in this spot, Julian Hill and Durham Smythe to see the field at greater frequency. And looking to get the run game going. That's my early read on it. So not this week for me. Another of these players that is in a similar pricing range at a different position that I think is fundamentally underpriced is Puka Nacua. He has really one fully healthy game all season. It was last week. He had a snap rate up near 80%, 9 catches on 14 targets as the alpha in this offense. What do you make of that game environment this week?
Yeah, I mean, the game environment itself is potentially to be like one of those, like if we can get this game into the 20s, there are some pieces here that I think are interesting. I do think from a matchup stance, it does set up more favorable for Nakua versus Cooper Kupp. We've kind of seen when they're on the field together, Nakua has more like first read stuff, and he's been kind of more the primary guy when both guys are available. He also plays, 74% of his snaps when both are on the field outside compared to Kupp, who's right under 70% in the slot. And the Patriots have been really touched up on the boundaries this season. It was funny because early in the season, like people like had like this thing about like Christian Gonzalez like being awesome, and I'm like, they're just getting smoked still. It doesn't matter like if he's playing well. They're 28th in catch rate allowed to wide receiver boundary targets, 26th in yards per target, but against slot receivers, they're 7th in yards per target, 14th in catch rate allowed to targets inside. So that I think does set up for Puka Nacua to be a guy if you're going to pay up for in this game. I also think inversely, like the Rams have a lot of similar splits. Like the Rams have been absolutely one of the best teams in the NFL against slot receivers, but have been bad against outside receivers. We've already seen Kayshon Boutte kind of get like some draws, like a min price guy this week. It does line up from a matchup stance. And also I think at his price in this game, where projected ownership is looking right now, this would not be a spot to completely overlook Kyren Williams because we know the touchdown equity still exists, even though he hasn't scored for the past 2 weeks. And if the Rams are playing ahead in this game, running backs have scored 50% of the touchdowns allowed by the Patriots. That's 6th highest in the league. And they've been giving up a lot of production to running backs anyway. So Kyren Williams also on my radar as a guy that potentially is being overlooked this week.
Yeah, 100% agree with that. I mean, Kyren Williams had scored a touchdown in every game until week 9. So like 10 touchdowns.
It's because of just the CMCH. Like the field is gravitating to CMCH in this week.
Yeah. With you there.
And how tilting was it to miss the Saquon game off the main slate?
Dude, and how tilting was it to be on, going back here, to be on Christian McCaffrey last week, and then he has the workload that he does, and he doesn't like do much with it. I was like, man, he was.
You know how many times I've tried to play this Saquon leverage game where no one's rostering him, and he wouldn't have been rostered at all on Sunday.
I know.
With CMC and Achane. I was so like,
yeah, that dude. He looks healthy. He looks quick. He looks young. He looks good. Anyway, we digress. Any interest? I brought it up earlier when we were talking about last week. Ramondre Stevenson in the 6 games now that the Patriots, if we want to include his clunker last week, we will. In the 6 games the Patriots have not been blown out in, Ramondre Stevenson is averaging over 19.5 DK points per game. And that's with his 8.6 output last week. He's averaging 21.5 running back opportunities in those games. And so is this a spot where the Patriots don't get blown out? Is this a spot where because if the Patriots don't get blown out, Ramondre Stevenson should be expected to have one of the more robust roles this week. Is this a spot where you're looking at Ramondre at all?
I can squint to see it from a volume perspective. If you want to go that route, I think there are other running backs that are a little more alluring, and I don't love kind of the matchup here. The Rams low key have been pretty much a pass funnel, even for as bad as they've been, and they've been really good. They're 4th in points per allowed per touch to running backs. We just saw them stymie Devin Achane, who we're talking about just being so giddy to play in a game where he had that workload. 12 carries for 37 yards. They've yet to allow a 100-yard rusher on the season. Running backs only scored 27% of the touchdowns against the Rams. It's the 7th lowest rate in the league. So I could definitely see, because anytime the Patriots have been in neutral game script, they've tipped their hand. Like they're gonna just try to play safe football and they run it through the backfield. So I have no problem with it. But I'm not like intoxicated with like potentially. I think you have to have the touchdowns this week.
It's a very interesting dynamic of this game because we have all these splits, like when they're blown out, when the Patriots are in games, and then we have a matchup against the Rams that is potentially like the worst schematic matchup for that. You look at what Drake May has done in his sample size of his short career. So much of the pass game volume and where he's looking first read wise is to tight ends and is to Demario Douglas over the middle of the field, and that's kind of the area of this heavy zone defense for the Rams, where they're a zone defense, but they're packed inside. They play inside out zone. So that it becomes a little bit more congested over those areas. So it's very interesting. My early read on this game is that Vegas has it wrong. I think that the Rams should be kind of favored more. And if that's the case, it kind of removes the potential for the value stack on the Patriots side. I think Puka can still get there on his own. Kyron Williams can still get there on their own, but I'm less interested in game environment bets in this spot. How do you see that?
Yeah, I'm pretty much with you. Like I said, if you're punting, I'm not going to push back on like anyone's punt play. Like, if you're chasing Butte, I get it.
Jason Butte. That's
Chase Jean Butte.
That should be somebody's team name in fantasy. Jason Butte.
Chasing
Anyway,
Butte.
we're going to let this question guide us to the next game that we'll talk about. Potential value here in this Browns Saints game. The question is good leverage to stack Jameis with Judy and Njoku with no Tillman. I'll let you take a crack at that first.
Potentially, this is an interesting spot for me because I kind of like the Browns and the market does too. The Browns opened as dogs. Now they're favored. It's swung back like three full points in their direction. And if the Browns are in a spot where they actually can establish Nick Chubb, do we see them have this high drop back rate over expectation, right? Because when you look at the 3 games since Nick Chubb has come back, they start a game with Dorian Thompson. Well, he comes in for Deshaun Watson. That's where he tore his Achilles. Dorian Thompson Robinson comes in. It's his first game back. They really doesn't have a workload for him. Then they face the Baltimore Ravens, who are complete pass funnel. They're one of the best run defenses in the league. And then they face the Chargers, who are good against the run, and then they game scripted the Browns out of the run. So do we see more of a pullback on Jameis Winston if it's more of a neutral game script and the Browns are playing ahead against an opponent that hasn't tackled anyone for like 8 weeks? The Saints have not made a tackle. I don't know if they've actually tackled the player in bounds in 8 games. It confirms a real stat. I don't know.
Somebody fact check that.
So is this a spot for them to come out of the bag and say, oh, we can actually do something with Nick Chubb? And does that kind of have a trickle down on everything? Because when you look at like kind of the target tree for the Browns since Jameis has taken over, it is kind of flat. Even though Cedric Tillman's been the most consistent of the 3, but it's still been kind of flat. Like we've seen a game where Elijah Moore had a 12-target game. Judy's still getting viable targets. He has 8 targets and 11 targets. But what if we have a game where Jameis Winston throws 24 passes? Like that actually exists in the range of outcomes for this game. So that's why I think like when you're looking at from like a leverage stance, some of these guys, and I do think Cedric Tillman's underpriced. But what if we do get that environment? That's why I said like from a leverage stance, he can be maybe poached in larger field tournaments if we get that Nick Chubb game. I don't think Chubb himself on DraftKings is that playable at his price. I think on FanDuel at 6,200, you can play him. At 6K on DraftKings, we know he's not going to catch any passes. We saw Jerome Ford come back before the bye and play the passing down stuff. So you got to get the bonus and you got to get, I think, multiple touchdowns out of Nick Chubb if you think you're going to play him. But I do think that Nick Chubb is enough of a potential thorn in this game environment to kind of slow down anything you want to do around Jameis Winston. And I'm looking at early in the week. I think Jameis is going to get squeezed out of my quarterback pool.
Oh man, these are fighting words, man, in these streets.
I know. And it's a Jameis revenge game, right? Like the fun time.
Well, half of the league is a Jameis revenge game, if we're being honest. But yeah, no, I will respectfully disagree. And I think we have enough of a sample to support my case in that once the Browns get into this like YOLO, don't give a fuck kind of mentality, and we saw it last year with Joe Flacco, we're starting to see it with Jameis Winston. If they're in this mentality of like all bets are off, and they effectively have to win out or win all but one remaining game if they want a chance at the playoffs. So that starts with this week. If I'm seeing this, like the state of my team, and I see that like Nick Chubb has, 3.5 yards per carry since coming back, to me, and I also see this has to we have to consider the defense too, because they're playing a lot of man coverage. They're blitzing a lot, but it hasn't been effective as last season. So if I'm looking at like the state of my team and I'm seeing like, we have to win off. All bets are off. Our backs are against the wall. We have to win out. All bets are off. Our backs are against the wall. How do we do that? It probably has to flow through Jameis for me. I get it. And Nick Chubb is seeing the highest touch to snap rate in the league in his 3 healthy games this season.
Which makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, look at he's in his 3 games since being activated from injured reserve, 11 carries, 3 targets on 36% snap rate, 16 carries, 2 targets on 61% snap rate, 15 carries, 1 target on 35% snap rate. So like when he's on the field, he's seeing work. Yes, like Jerome Ford out-snapped him last week. He saw 2 carries and 3 targets. So it's very, very clear that when he's on the field, he's going to see usage. That said, and what kind of gets me more interested, like if I were going to a one-off and you were to say like Nick Chubb over Cedric Tillman as a leverage, that's totally viable because Nick Chubb can get there and the game environment not go off. But what we've seen from this Browns team is they have increased the total number of offensive plays per game that are able to be run from scrimmage by 10% in Jameis Winston starts this year. That's incredible. So like they combined for, I want to get the number exactly right. They combined for 137 offensive plays against the Ravens. They combined for 136 offensive plays against the Chargers. And that was with the Chargers running only 57. So the fact that they have this high pass rate over expectation, the fact that their defense is aggressive, they blitz heavy, but they're not hitting home at the same rate. The fact that we're getting all these additional offensive plays, to me, I'm more interested in saying like, I'll leverage Cedric Tillman by completely game stacking the spot. I want to like Jameis plus Jerry Jeudy plus Cedric Tillman, bring it back with Taysom Hill or Alvin Kamara or Marquez Valdes-Scantling. Maybe his snap rate increases here. That's kind of my read. Like I prefer going that. So I won't like hard disagree because I think that Nick Chubb does have the path because he's seeing heavy touches when he's on the field. But I'm more interested as opposed to just looking for a one-off. I'm more interested in stacking this spot up. Yeah, that's my read. Your rebuttal there.
No, I mean, I think it's fine to play that way. My thing is we just haven't seen the Browns, even going back to the Flacco turnover because there was no Nick Chubb. We haven't seen the Browns play in like a rushing environment. And we might not get it, right? Like they are on the road. And if the Saints go ahead, they're obviously then Nick Chubb is rendered out of the picture again because we saw what happened against the Chargers. If they have to drop back, he's not going to be on the field. It's going to be Jerome Ford. So you're basically trying to walk that fine line of predicting the game environment from both sides of this game, which makes it kind of wild, which makes it like trickier, right? From like saying, all right, I'm going to go all in, or you do go all in. And if you just get it wrong, you're wrong. Like, which I have no problem with. If you're going to onslaught it, that's usually like, if you're doing small field stuff, that's honestly my preferred way to play. The other side of it is probably a little bit more tricky because we've seen the Browns be just a volatile defense. Like they are still like, they have a lot of metrics and peripherals that you still like, but then they just give up a ton of big plays because they're so aggressive. Like they have these games, like both games, they faced Derrick Henry and Saquon Barkley and kind of shut both those guys down. Saquon only had 54 yards against them. Derrick Henry only 77. He did get a touchdown. They're 5th in success rate on running back carries, but they're also 29th in yards allowed after contact. They're 25th in touchdowns allowed to running backs. The other interesting dynamic too in this game is they're 2nd in receiving points allowed games to running backs too. So it's like all this, they have like all these volatile metrics. As a pass defense, they allow one of the lowest completion rates in the NFL, but then they give up the most amount of splash plays.
Splash plays, yeah.
So that's just like, that's, so if you wanted to chase Marcus Valdes-Scantling, you'd be like, well, if he's only at 3 targets, like, so what? That's what's pretty funny, right? Like, so like the Browns are like this complete Jekyll and Hyde, like the defensive unit too.
I have the same read, and I wrote up that game kind of in the same light. It was like, look, the Browns are really, really aggressive, but because of their aggression, they're prone to getting burned in man coverage. So if I'm looking to a Saints player in this game environment of like, how does this game take off? It probably comes from 6 targets to Marquez Valdes-Scantling. In this, like his structure in the offense is very much in line with how Rashid Shaheed was being utilized. So if we were saying like, what's the prospect of playing Rashid Shaheed at 4,400? I think there should be some interest there. You need a deep bomb or two. And it feels a little bit point chasey, but you're not looking to the Saints for volume. You're looking to them for the splash plays, and they have proven that they can generate those splash plays. They've proven that they're going to take those deep shots regardless of who's on the field. And you're looking for them, that perfect situation for MVS to take advantage of blown coverage or man coverage or get behind his man against an aggressive unit. And it's the other side of that is the Saints offensive line is still banged up. So they're going to need like mass protect. And
yeah, the one thing about that, we talked about that game environment is and maybe I just falsely can't remove it from my mind, but just that 2 weeks ago, that Carolina game, man, like the fact that they just kind of did nothing against Carolina is scary.
This, man, they're hearing our words, but they're not listening to what we're saying. I'm just kidding. Yeah, he is all about volume. The matchup is poor. We should expect volume through the air. He has not scored a touchdown in 4 games. There's a lot. There's just the pulling aspects of this spot. Yes, we're not looking to the Saints for volume. If Alvin Kamara is going to be the highest owned raw player on the slate, I am okay looking elsewhere.
Yeah, I mean, I show him he's basically projected to be the second highest running back on the slate. And I look at his price and then I look at other guys around him. And this is the week where I feel like I can chase other more outright upside. I think there's more floor in Kamara than there's been the past couple weeks, is what I'll say.
Yeah. Yep. I'm with you.
He can still get there. We know from an opportunity stance in terms of team volume share what he's going to get. But I do think that there's more floor that baked in than the last 2 weeks when we've seen him operate with like no other players on the offense alive.
Which effectively is the same situation for this week. But Taysom, baby, Taysom Vulture will crush Alvin Kamara.
But I think it's different, though, when you're facing the Falcons and you're facing the Panthers versus this Browns team. Again, that will give up big plays. Yeah. But I do think there's more floor. Like I said, look at that. I mean, Saquon 54 yards against them. They face some guys, but then also J.K. Dobbins gets there. So it's good. But I think from a tournament perspective, if you're trying to play that outcome, if a guy's going to be 25 or 30% large field at his price, and you're saying, all right, if they're not accounting for this floor, I can. That's a chance for you just immediately, if he doesn't get there, to have immediate 2 steps forward on the field.
Yeah. At the same time, guys, this isn't searching for floor. This is searching for ceiling. So, we'll just leave that discussion at that. That's kind of, you've heard both sides of that game environment. I think we got to talk about the Steelers and the Ravens next. I'll throw it directly to you. How are you viewing that game environment?
Not your throwback Steelers Ravens game. I think a lot of people have obviously have the stigma of when these two teams play. It's a fist fight. Games in the teens. But these two teams come into this spot. Well, one, the Ravens in general. The Ravens remind me very much of last year's Lions team on steroids. This is a team that is so good on offense, and they're so hard to game plan for because they can be so multifaceted. This Ravens team is so equipped to handle things like what the Steelers want to do inherently defensively than they have in other iterations, because if you want to play man coverage and you want to, run a lot of man blitzes against the Ravens, that not only one, do they have this RPO game now with Derrick Henry and not these other vagabond running backs that they've trotted out the last couple of years to where you can get home runs beat up on you in the run game. They have now surrounded Lamar Jackson with players that are predicated on getting open first, creating separation. So if the Steelers want to come into this and play this, man coverage style blitzing, that's going to be problematic, I think, and play more into the hands. We've seen the Broncos were doing this, and then they didn't do this against the Ravens because it's hard to play man coverage when you have the RPO game with Derrick Henry, right? It's just very hard to play a one-on-one defense in those situations. We saw Todd Bowles try to do a little bit of it in that Monday night game. Antoine Winfield was just in hell. There's that play where he's just like, what do I even do right here? Where Lamar, he's at the mesh point and is just like, and then you have to factor into the absence of Alex Highsmith in this game is massive. And not that the absence of Kyle Hamilton isn't massive on the other side, which we'll get to, but the Ravens defense is already bad. Alex Highsmith with him on the field, the Steelers are basically 5th in the NFL in pressure rate, and they go to 30th in pressure rate with him off the field on snaps this year. Like, this is a significant loss for this defense. But the reason I make that commentary about them being this year's Lions on steroids is because they're going to score points. But then on defense, the Ravens have an excellent run defense, like the Lions last year, and they push you to attack them at their weakest point. Even in neutral game scripts, they push you to attack their weakest point, which is the pass defense, which has created these game environments now for the Ravens, like the Lions last year, where just all these games are bonanzas. Like their games are averaging 57 combined points per game. Their games are averaging 808 combined yards per game, by far the most in the league. So like this is the Ravens are a team that you kind of circle weekly like you did last year's Lions, because they just push teams into these game environments that are exciting. And I'm excited for this because since the Steelers have had Russell Wilson take over, they're 31st in the NFL in drop back rate. They're 9% below pass rate expectations. We're going to see the Steelers drop back and throw in this game.
Yeah, and if the Steelers are dropping back and throwing, you have to immediately start talking about George Pickens. George Pickens in this spot is, and like, it's hard to make the case that he's underpriced like we did with Devon Achane, like we did with Puka Nacua, like we did with Christian McCaffrey, because the floor is not comparable. But you look at George Pickens' ceiling at a price of $7K, and this is one of the guys that we have to be talking about and considering that could put up a 35 fantasy point game here. If he's doing that, because he is such a big portion of the offense through the air, I would say if you're playing Pickens, you almost have to pair him with Russell Wilson. And the reason is there's really only one quarterback on the slate that can put up a score that you were not winning without, and it's Lamar Jackson on the other side of this game. So if Lamar Jackson is failing to put up 40 fantasy points, if he's even like a 32, is probably not going to be something that you cannot overcome. So if he's failing to do that, it then brings in the ability to go down to some of these cheaper priced quarterbacks. And you're saying like the 31 point performance from Lamar Jackson isn't enough to put the slate out of reach. A 26 point game from Russell Wilson is a better point per dollar bet, and I can open up salary to play around with elsewhere. That's kind of this idea of like, how do we gain value in this like state of DFS right now where there isn't a lot of value? One of the ways is these cheap quarterback team stacks. So if it's kind of this flow chart for the Steelers, like if Pickens, then Russ Wilson. If Russ Wilson, then probably somebody else too, because you need 25, 26 fantasy points out of him. What does that equate to? That's 300 yards and 2 touchdowns, or to like 250 and 3. So if he's getting there, you need either touchdowns or 300 yards. And Pickens isn't going to get all of those. So to me, we have this weird situation where Mike Williams is going to be more involved. That's probably going to come at the direct expense of Van Jefferson. So if Russell Wilson is getting to 300 yards, I think one of the interesting ways that he does that is through Calvin Austin. So now we're getting more value. I really, really like Russell Wilson plus George Pickens plus Calvin Austin. Calvin Austin as the slot man in this downfield role. He's the player least likely to be influenced by Mike Evans. They don't use the tight ends very much in the pass game. If Russell Wilson is hitting 300 yards, how's he doing it? Well, one of the paths to that is Calvin Austin. So I like attacking this game environment through the Steelers pass game. It's very, very interesting to me. The question then becomes like, who do we play on the Ravens side? Because we expect them to score points. Do you have a favorite like one-offy type bring back guy from the Ravens?
Yeah, I think my favorite is Bateman. And what's funny is I would have saved you I'm going to make the same argument that I would have made last week that wouldn't happen. But so the Steelers have been they've been really good against wide receiver ones this year. They're 4th in scoring against wide receiver ones. And they've pushed some stuff to wide receiver 2s this year. And last week, I got to Noah Brown because of this, and McLaurin had a better game than Noah Brown, but Noah Brown did out target Terry McLaurin in that game. But you look at some of the target tree, the wide receiver twos against when teams have like a more alpha wide receiver one, and you can kind of say, is Zay Flowers that? But from a target perspective, he is. But, you know, it was Jalen Tolbert outplaying CeeDee Lamb and having 7 for 87 and 1. It was Josh Downs. It was Josh Reynolds. It was Darius Slayton. Like all these guys got there against the Steelers, these wide receiver twos. And we know Bateman can, you know, one, give you a splash play. He's also at a price point too, I think, that is very palatable to open the door for a lot of things. I also think if you are playing the Pittsburgh passing side, we don't have to ignore Derrick Henry for the reasons that I kind of laid out. If the Steelers are going to play aggressive, you have the chance to have those home run runs. Also, I mean, Pittsburgh hasn't allowed a lot of touchdowns this year because they faced a lot of bad offenses, but running backs have 53% of the touchdowns against the Steelers, the 4th highest total. So there is an opportunity, I think, for Derrick Henry too, to potentially be involved in some of these stacks. He makes them very expensive is the problem.
Yeah.
Which is a little bit trickier because you know, if you're doing Pickens plus Russ plus Derrick Henry, like you inherently also want to try to incorporate one of the guys that we've talked about that's going to be popular, like a CMC or an Achane. And then that gets really restrictive because of Henry's price. But I do like Bateman as the cheap guy. Flowers also has a lot of matchup splits that are favorable, and we know he can get open if he's going to be one-on-one. Because when the Steelers are second in the league in cover 3. Against cover 3, Flowers 30% target share, 2.9 yards per out run. And then when they don't play cover 3, they like to play aggressive. They like to use those man blitzes. They play a lot of cover 1, 10th highest rate in the league. And then against cover 1, it's been all Zay Flowers, 35% of the team targets, 3.1 yards per out run. So like I said, outside of just like the wide receiver 1 peripheral stuff, I do think it's gonna be more of like a Flowers Bateman type game, but I do like Bateman a lot for the reasons I would have played Noah Brown and been holding the bag against last week.
What do you make of Isaiah Likely practicing in full on Thursday?
And kind of a bummer
coming back. Yeah, I know. I was really excited about Mark Andrews. Mark Andrews has kind of come on hot of late. And a lot of those games came with Likely in the lineup. He has 5 touchdowns in his last 5
That's
games.
the thing, is it's all touchdown driven.
Yeah.
If you look at like things like you know, you have fantasy points have the ass metric. ESPN has open score, but Mark Andrews scores well on both sites, like on both of those. Like on a per opportunity basis, Mark Andrews has been Mark Andrews. The issue has been the consistent full-time opportunities. That's the only roadblock he's really had all year, is playing a full allotment of snaps. Last week on Thursday night, he was on the field for 94% of the dropbacks without Isaiah Likely. His previous season high was only 78%. He's only, with Isaiah Likely been in the lineup, he's only been on the field for over 60% of the dropbacks in one of those past 7 games. And that's the only bugaboo. He still is Mark Andrews.
Yeah. And he is because he is still Mark Andrews, we can use like historical splits. And Mark Andrews has always been the zone and the 2 high killer. So now we have a Steelers defense that they're playing zone, but they are in single high at one of the highest rates in the league, 71.0%. So it becomes this, like, I don't know if like the schematic matchup isn't really there. He's going to need multiple touchdowns. So if he's hitting multiple touchdowns, you almost have to play Lamar Jackson with him. That's kind of my read on the situation. Anything to add? Okay. Deontay Johnson, there was a quote that came out yesterday from his offensive coordinator that was like, the question was like, why isn't Deontay Johnson more involved? And he's like, hey man, the other guys are playing really good. So why would we involve Deontay Johnson more? So yeah, I don't know about.
Yeah, Lamar had the quote. He's like, I'd like to get him more involved, but also if it's not broke, don't fix it. That was the quote he had. And I was like, yeah. I mean, even if Deontay Johnson starts playing more, it's going to be at the expense of Aguilar. It's not going to be at the expense of Bateman.
Yes, 100%. Looking at Mark Andrews' splits against single high this season, target rate of only 12%, a targets per route run of only 18%. Zay Flowers is the dude in this offense against single highs. And we know the Steelers are going to be playing it a bunch. But we also have the splash play potential here with Rashad Bateman, but he has not performed well against single high this season.
Yeah, it just kind of goes versus like what you want, what kind of salary you have to kind of work with, I think is the kind of how you're going to get to what piece you land on here, how the rest of your lineup is built out.
Yeah. Yep. Okay, I'll throw it to you. I brought up a bunch of game environments that we should probably be hunting for upside. We didn't talk about the 49ers really outside of CMC. Where do you want to go
Well, I
over the
mean,
next 10
just real
minutes?
quick, just because people I think know the 49er side, right, and what to do and Purdy and whatever you want to do, but I don't want to fully ignore the Seattle side of this game.
Okay.
And I feel like that's kind of what we're doing, not, the royal we,
Yeah.
collectively the field, because this game is a high total. They combined for 60 points a couple weeks ago. And on the Seattle side, you're just going to get a ton of dropbacks. Like you just are. I mean, Geno Smith leads the league in dropbacks per game. He hit 50 pass attempts against when these teams played earlier in the season. So if you just know you're going to get that type of raw volume, we're not going to project 50, but we can probably get close to upper 30s and 40 plus, and then maybe tack on extra. I just don't want to ignore that level of opportunity, right? And
Yeah.
we've seen a big price drop for DK Metcalf, and I think he's very interesting in stacks and where he's priced, and the kind of this just like this just valley of pricing this week. Just I don't know if a lot of gamers are just going to play guys in that price zone. Like, because we
Yeah.
named off all the 5K sub 6K wide receivers already. We talked about, potentially jamming in Puka. So I don't want to ignore a $6,500 DK Metcalf. I really don't, especially in a game where they could have like 50 dropbacks, because he's got the highest deep ball rate of his career. 31% of his targets are on deep balls. He's been getting behind the defense. He had a 70-yard touchdown in this first matchup, get called back
Called back.
for
Yeah.
the dumbass illegal shift, that Kenneth Walker had that got two guys in motion. So yeah. And then there are some other pieces too. I think I don't want to chase Jackson Smith and Jigba's week 9 game, but
Yeah.
the 49ers have been vulnerable to slot receivers all year. They're actually dead last in yards per target allowed to slot receivers. I just don't want people to forget about the Seahawks guys.
That is a good shout. I like that. I think you can play DK Metcalf as a way to get a mini correlation here with like CMC, Jawan Jennings, something like that. I think you can play him on his own as well. Yeah, I like that shout a good bit. There's the shout, baby. One thing we didn't mention about the Ravens is if Lamar Jackson is putting the slate out of reach, it's highly likely that Zay Flowers has a path to do the same based on like the just the raw matchup. And if the Ravens are scoring a lot of touchdowns, Derrick Henry is extremely viable as a player that could put the slate out of reach. And I don't think anybody on the slate, due to player pricing, is going to play all three together. So that is a very interesting way to say, like, the Ravens score 42 points here. They score 6-7 touchdowns. And nothing else comes close on the slate. And if you just play like Lamar Jackson with Derrick Henry with Zay Flowers, you can do whatever else. You're going to need value, but you can do whatever else you want on the roster. Anything else to add from the San Francisco-Seattle game?
No, I think everyone knows what to do with the 49ers. And they're going to get there with all those guys.
Yeah. The highest team total on the slate is the Lions. That said, they have a 14-point spread. I can't remember the last time I saw a 14-point spread in the NFL. I really can't. 14 points, man. Typically what we've seen is like David Montgomery is going to see the greater share in the 1A, 1B to start the game because they're wearing the opposing defensive line down. We saw it like play out beautifully the last time they were out in that comeback win over Houston. Is this a spot where David Montgomery might see more second half usage?
I mean, you would say that based on the implied game environment. The problem with David Montgomery always comes down to where he's priced always, right? Like that's just the thing. Like he's consistently priced like a little bit above where he probably always should be. So your path to your like optimal run out is literally reliant on not only multiple touchdowns, but him hitting the bonus too at that price, at that salary, right? And that's always kind of the rub with David Montgomery. But I mean, you would obviously pinpoint this to being like, yes, 14-point home favorites, 30-point team total lines up for a David Montgomery game. The problem is you just have to have like such a supreme path still, even with that in place.
Yeah, this is yes.
And we talked a lot about the guys that are underpriced. I mean, Amon-Ra St. Brown's been overpriced all year, and it hurts to say that. It
Yeah,
really
he's
hurts
scored
to
in
say
7
that.
consecutive games, something like that.
He's got more than 8 targets in one game this
Yeah.
season. He's the second highest priced wide receiver on both sites, and he has not paid off at this salary this season because
It's Justin Jefferson, man. Similar discussion. Like the pass volume is just really, really hard to come by in these offenses.
Yep.
Yeah.
And it's really hard to see the Lions having a million. Obviously, when we get in these spots, you say like, all right, well, if the Lions are still going to score 30, like before these guys come out of the game, like these guys are going to be involved with scoring the points. Yes, that's true. But is this a 30 drop back game for Jared Goff? Probably not.
A 22, maybe. Yeah. They have shown extreme tendencies to just kind of manage the rest of the game. And yeah, like Goff could have 4 touchdown passes on like 22 pass attempts. Like that is within the range of outcomes, but it's a very, very fine needle to thread based on the pricing of these guys. If I'm going anywhere on the Lions, because Sam Laporta is going to be out or likely to be out, I don't think he's been ruled out yet. Jameson Williams presents the per touch upside path on this offense. So I think it's fine if you want to throw a dart on JMO. But I'm not looking at, even with a 30-point team total, I'm not looking at any of these guys and being like, I have to account for this.
Which is
team.
wild. Yeah, which is
wild. It is.
No,
wild,
I'm with you. It's just one of those spots, because we've seen, the Lions in these kind of, the positive game scripts be a little more hesitant to give Jahmyr Gibbs run out. We saw it in the Tennessee game. We saw it in the Green Bay game, which might have been like a terrain thing. We're going to run the mutter in Green Bay, that game that was in the rain. But I mean, yeah, Jameson Williams would be the one guy I would have mild interest because what you're buying. Like, if you play Jameson Williams, you're clicking that button, you're literally saying, I'm hoping to catch this 50+ yard touchdown.
Yeah.
And the Jaguars also, if they're 31st in, completion rate on deep throws to wide receivers, no teams allowed more yards on those throws than the Jaguars because they play a lot of man coverage, they play a lot of aggressive stuff. So,
yeah. The Jaguars defense, that's an interesting discussion because they have been one of the more fluid defenses as far as alignments go, as far as schemed usage, as far as like personnel groupings. They've mixed dime, they've mixed nickel, they've started the season being the most man heavy team in the league. Then they went through this lull where they were zone heavy and then they went man heavy. Now they're back to zone. It's been wild. I don't know how they're going to view this spot because they really,
I don't know if it matters.
I don't know if it matters, right? But like, in order for them to have any chance, we say any chance, but like they have to have a repeat performance of last year on the defensive side, or last week, where they picked off Sam Darnold 3 times. They were able to make it, and it wasn't just that they picked him off 3 times. It was like 2 of those came in the red zone. Like they were taking points off the scoreboard. So, yeah, that's just.
I mean, listen, last week my big thing was like, oh my God, if everyone on the slate's going to play all these slot receivers, because we walk into last week where it's just like Khalil Shakir, Josh Downs, and Ladd McConkey. I was like, oh, I cannot wait to just punt and play Justin Jefferson and drop a 30 burger on these guys playing these slot receivers. Guess what?
Yeah.
Get wrecked.
Yeah.
Wrecked.
Go sit in your corner over there. Go time out. All right, man. We are to the point of the show where we got to get the out the doors, the really, really hidden stuff. Give me your out the door shot for ceiling this week.
And I never know if like this show is like, I know we do more DraftKings stuff, but I definitely want to highlight Quentin Johnston on FanDuel. Because that game's on the main slate if you play over there. But I mean, so I like this for 2 reasons, because one, Ladd McConkey again is tracking for a lot of ownership over there. But the Bengals have been awesome
worse on FanDuel, man.
What's that?
That's even worse on FanDuel.
Yes, even worse on FanDuel. But the Bengals have been awesome against slot receivers this season, which I think and they've been awful against boundary receivers, which I think plays into this. And we're probably going to see more passing volume for the Chargers as well. So definitely Quentin Johnston's on my radar as a potential leverage point. I got a gross one for you. Definite gross one. We know gamers are going to get the Broncos guys this week. We haven't even talked about Estime and where you land on Estime, but we know Cortland Sutton and Bo Nix are going to be played this week. I'm looking at this spot. If there was ever going to be a game that Kyle Pitts was going to be involved, this would be it, right?
No. Sit in your corner, man. You got to go sit in your corner in timeout again.
Because the Broncos are awesome against running backs and they're awesome against wide receivers. They've really kind of pushed stuff to tight ends. 24% of the targets against Denver have gone now to tight ends. Well, wide receivers are they're 30th in target rate to wide receivers because they've just been good. They're 24th as a default in catches allowed for tight ends. Like if there was ever a game for Kyle Pitts to be potentially as like a guy you could bring back in a mini stack and be involved, like this might be it, man. There's nobody going to play Kyle Pitts this week because Kelsey and Knox, and we didn't talk. It's crazy. We haven't even talked Chiefs Bills. Like,
I know.
I think it's wild, but there's a real gross one. Where are you on this Anthony Richardson situation coming back to being the starting quarterback against this Jets team that seemingly, since Robert Saleh was fired, can't stop anybody?
Yeah, it's very interesting. This is the right move for the franchise. It has to be, right? Like, you're not making the playoffs. Even if you were to make the playoffs, you're probably a one and done playoff team. You have to develop Anthony Richardson. But at the same time, like, he has been so atrociously bad at very routine things. My read on this situation is Shane Steichen is not a coach that is coaching for his coaching life. I don't think it is a very, very slim chance that Shane Steichen is potentially being fired at the end of this season.
Which made the initial move weird.
It did. I think it came from ownership. And Steichen just had to be the man against the media. But like, if I'm Shane Steichen, knowing that like, hey, we have to develop this guy. We have to see what we have. They started the season with Anthony Richardson really with the training wheels on. It was very clear that they were saying like, hey, we need to develop this guy as a pocket passer or a pocket presence, or at least like develop his passing. Because I mean, he had like 19 starts, something like that, since high school at the start of the season. So in my opinion, knowing who Shane Steichen is, knowing that he is very, very good at like maximizing the talent that he has on the field, like what if they just come out and say like, all right, dude, go play some schoolyard shit. I'm going to call some plays to get some guys open. If it's not there, take off. I think that's within the range of outcomes here. So I have some interest in Anthony Richardson. I think you don't have to pair him with...
that's the best part, right?
Yeah. And that feels so weird for me to say because I've always been like, yo, stop it with these naked quarterback stuff. But his price and his potential for rushing upside, I think you can bring him in with like a downfield threat. I'm not playing Michael Pittman because he has struggled over the short intermediate areas of the field. I'm not playing Josh Downs. So that really just leaves like Alec Pierce. Pittman may or not play. If he doesn't play, that brings in Adonai Mitchell. If he does play, it kind of makes it where you can't really click Adonai Mitchell's name, the tight end group. So it's like effectively just Alec Pierce if Michael Pittman is in. You're effectively just saying like, hey, Anthony Richardson rushes for 2 scores and he hits Pierce for a downfield shot for another one or something. I don't know. That's my read. I have some interest. What about you?
Yeah. No, that's why I just brought it up because my angle with him was the same as you said. Is the Jets 30th in rushing yards allowed to quarterbacks. It's been pretty consistent. And then the fact that his pricing makes it so you don't have to force a stack. I don't think.
Yeah. At the same time, like, still theoretically his ceiling is higher if he's hitting a wide receiver in a deep shot.
That's
probably Alec Pierce. Yeah. So like I don't know. You don't have to. I still think I would lean to playing him with Pierce. I like that shout out a good bit.
But those are about the randoms and
yeah. And if you're playing, we'll finish it with this. If you're playing Anthony Richardson, if you're playing Alec Pierce with him, I would also add Garrett Wilson, who is probably fundamentally underpriced at 7,100 on DraftKings as well. Garrett Wilson has a new role in this offense after Devontae Adams was added. He's working more downfield. He had
Lazard being out. Yeah, Lazard being on IR.
Yeah. So I think there's something to that. I think there's something to Anthony Richardson plus Alec Pierce plus Garrett Wilson here. Beautiful, man. That's going to do it for week 11. Really, really good to have you back, man. That was a bummer about last week. Yeah, we had to make the tough call just to move on. Programming update next week. We will be changing the time. We're still going to be Friday morning, but it's going to be at 8:30 Eastern. 8:30 Eastern next week for Searching for Ceiling. Your boy is heading to Vegas for the F1 race, so I'm leaving Friday after the show. So appreciate you, Rich. Good to have you back. Appreciate the accommodations for next week. Again, next week, Friday at 8:30 a.m. Eastern. And until then, y'all, we'll see you at the top of the leaderboards. Peace.
1 week season.